Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by Keith Wilson. Keith is a licensed mental health counselor and former certified substance abuse counselor in private practice in Rochester, New York. He's had more than 30 years experience with as diverse a population as troubled youth, troubled marriages, domestic violence victims and perpetrators, addicts and alcoholics, sexual abuse offenders, survivors and non-offending spouses, the seriously mentally ill, and the worried well, and the people who love all of the above. He's the author of 3 self-help books: Constructive Conflict, Building Something Good Out of All of Those Arguments; The Road to Reconciliation, A Comprehensive Guide to Peace When Relationships Go Bad; and How to Make an Apology You'll Never Have to Make Again. He's also published 3 novels, and early parts of what may be his next book, Searching for an Inner Adult, A Field Guide to Feelings, and The Reflectic Eclectic, can be found on his blog at keithwilsoncounseling.com. You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Keith Wilson, thank you so much for being on the program with me.
I'm happy to be here.
I am fascinated by all the different types of people you've worked with in terms of the population. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason that you've had such a diverse experience in your life, or is that just kind of accidental?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, so things kind of accumulate that way. For the longest, in any career, it takes a while before you get settled into something. And so I worked with kids who we used to call juvenile delinquents back in the beginning, and then alcoholics, and then folks with severe mental illnesses, some sexual offenders, many victims. Then I went into private practice, and that opened up a whole new field of folks that I work with. So at this point, I've seen just about everything and heard everything, and it's kind of hard to shock me.
Has there been a population or a type of client that was specifically hard for you, or that you're specifically excited to work with?
Well, I think there's aspects that are hard about every problem. Of course, it's a problem that people are bringing to my office. And these problems can get me discouraged as much as anybody else. But I try to find just what the problem is there for, what the function of it is, and try to be adaptable to anything that comes along. Now, many people have got things going on that I have not personally experienced. That's probably
Sure.
the case most of the time.
Yeah.
So then the problem is to set aside my own personal biases and knowledge and try to, not lose that entirely, but to enter fully into the world of the other person so I can understand where they're coming from and what it's all like. And then I like to, return to my world so that we can compare and see what we can learn from each other.
Very interesting. I like that approach. I mean, I think everybody I've talked to who's a counselor has somewhat of a similar approach, because there's no way you could be an alcoholic and a victim of sexual abuse and this and that and also be a therapist, right? So you have to kind of be able to put yourself in their shoes a little bit.
Nor is there any way that you can attend all those trainings.
Right.
You know, you can't educate yourself fully for anything that can come in through your door. I think a good therapist learns from their clients, but not to stop there, because if all we know is what the client knows, then we're stuck too. So we have to some somehow get beyond that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did you discover your passion for writing, and how did you decide to become an author?
Well, I've always had a passion for writing. That's really something that preceded being a therapist.
Oh wow.
Uh, yeah, and like many shrinks, I gotta take everything back to my parents. And my father grew up with a writer. His mother was a maid in a rich person's home, and the rich person was an author, and he admired him. And so all I needed to do was go to school and write a story, and he was all over me, praising me for the story. And that 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 stuck. I enjoyed doing that. So when I finally went to college, I initially was going to be a literature major. I always wanted to write and read, of course. But any literature major has to endure that question of what do you do with it?
Hmm.
And so I wasn't sure what to do with it other than to teach and take the crapshoot of trying to write and hoping that that would earn me a living. But I found therapy and being a counselor as a perfect thing that an aspiring writer can do.
Why is that?
Uh,
Why is that such a perfect fit?
well, I think my background in reading prepared me to listen to other people's stories. It prepared me, particularly when you read novels, you're getting into the head of the character.
Yeah.
All right. Um, so that prepared me. I think most there is a thing called narrative therapy,
Yeah.
but really all psychotherapy is narrative therapy, because
Hmm.
that's the only thing we have to work with is the narrative. So I sometimes think of myself as my client's editor, someone who takes their story and helps them organizes it and helps them prepare it for other people to understand, and
Including
also something,
themselves. Yeah.
and for them to understand. So I think there's a perfect fit there. Now,
That's so interesting. I only work with couples, and I
sure.
mean, it's an individual from couples too, but I often will use an analogy too. I tell people I'm a translator, right? You're
Mhm,
speaking one language, she's speaking the other, and I'm
mhm,
really just there to kind of translate. I love the idea of kind of framing it for your clients as an editor and
uh-huh,
organizing the thoughts. That's brilliant.
yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Um, what when you feel compelled to write a book, because you have written so many,
Mhm.
where does that compulsion come from? How do you decide what you're going to write about, what the topic is, be it self-help or a novel?
Uh, well, I started with fiction. I started with writing short stories, and my first, well, except for when I was a kid, when I started getting serious about writing, my
Hmm.
first short stories were largely inspired by my clients. At the time, I was working in an inner city mental health clinic, and I had a lot of people who were African American. They had experiences very foreign to mine.
Hmm.
They were largely severely mentally ill and drug addicted and alcoholic, and backgrounds of being abused and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, it's one thing when I see a client and I write a clinical note afterwards. I kind of have to put in all that clinical
Sure.
language,
Sure.
which I found terribly restrictive. I hate it.
Uh-huh.
What I would much rather do is become adept at speaking the client's language, and to be able to see things through their eyes. So I would start to write short stories. Not that I would copy my client's stories into a short story form, but I kind of imagined myself as a person growing up in um,
The
that
world.
kind of background.
Mm-hmm.
Now today, there's a little. Uh, if I were to do this now, I would be running the risk of appropriating
Sure.
their stories, and I I would take that very seriously, and I never even thought about it in those terms then. Um, but at the time, it was a chance for me to live a bigger life than I was living, uh, by living other people's lives this way.
Yeah, there's that imaginative exploration that comes with being an author.
Mm.
Excuse me. What about on the self-help side? How do you decide, which topics you want to write about?
Well, my first self help book was Constructive Conflict. And that was a case of having either couples in my office or individuals who had conflict with their loved ones, and wanting to give them some practical tools to handle these conflicts. I started off looking at some of the literature, and I wasn't very happy, frankly, with any of it. So I kind of wrote my own. I didn't really break any new ground. Constructive conflict is not a terribly original take on 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 communication with other
Uh-huh.
people, but I tried to put it into the terms that the people I was seeing would understand,
Mm-hmm.
um, and be very clear and direct about things.
Right.
So I started with that. And then the next book was The Road to Reconciliation. And that arose from, well, the fact that I was seeing many clients who all had breaks of some kind with loved ones, either through something that they did to hurt the loved one, or maybe
Vice
just their
versa.
illness hurt them.
Yeah.
They didn't try to hurt them, but their illness did, by being depressed or anxious or whatever. Or they were victims of the loved one hurting them. And I was looking for a way of helping them with this. And I attended a restorative justice conference. And I don't know how much you or anybody listening knows about restorative justice,
Well,
but
let's assume that no one knows anything so that we can.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it works like this: a kid, let's say a teenager goes and paints swastikas
Mm-hmm.
on the parking lot of a synagogue. Okay, and he gets caught.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, he comes before a judge, and the kid regrets doing it already. He's not uh, trying to make excuses or anything. He regrets doing this. But what's the judge going to do? The judge can send the kid to jail, where he'll probably, you know, meet a bunch of skinheads and become even further radicalized.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or he'll give the kid probation, and will probably be perceived as slapping him on the wrist,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. Or the judge could sentence the kid to see a restorative justice counselor. And if he sees the counselor, then the counselor will talk to him about, if he's really sorry he did this, and um, how he imagines it might have affected the congregation, and what he's willing to do to make amends. And then the counselor will talk to the congregation and, hear their story about how this affected them and how they think the kid might make amends. And then if everybody is still with the program at that point,
Mm-hmm.
then he'll have them all meet together and work something out, some way to that the kid can make amends. So I went to this conference to learn how to do this because at the time I was new in private practice and worried that I might not have enough work. Um, so I went to this conference and I thought about using these same principles with the people that I was already seeing. The alcoholic who, is following his 12-step program and, needs to make amends, but doesn't have all that good structure to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I tried to figure out um, how to guide them to do that. And I also had, a lot of people I was working with who were victimized and yet somehow either wanted to make peace with the victimization or they wanted to make a, reconcile with the person who hurt them. And how can I guide them without running into all the hazards that they could run into? And as I thought this through, one of the best ways I have of thinking is to write. So I would write these things for my blog. And then, over time, then this evolved into a book. And so you had a book.
And that's on reconciliation. That's the book you wrote?
Yeah, The Road to Reconciliation.
The Road to
Comprehensive Guide to Peace When Relationships Go Bad.
So, what are some surprising things that people who are struggling with reconciliation would find in your book? Maybe some kind of give us a sneak peek, if you will, into kind of the method of thinking that you
Okay.
kind of outline.
Well, when I tried to apply this restorative justice method to, say, couples, say you have an alcoholic husband who's, got a DWI and now the whole family's got to pay for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a harm done to the family. Um, uh, and if you stop there, I mean, you could just work with that and just stop there. But really, when you dig into it, you find that it's not that clear who's the victim
Mm-hmm.
quite often and who's the perpetrator. I mean, you have perpetrators kind of making excuses that, you made me do this. But I mean, still, that's a factor. You don't want to, rationalize their bad behavior by that means, but it's still a factor.
Yeah.
So, came up with this idea of the victim cycle where when you're victimized, the first thing you want to do is make some restitution,
Yeah.
retribution. I mean,
Okay.
and then that turns you into an offender, okay? And then the other person's victimized, and then they become an offender, and you go around and around and around. So, where do you start?
Right.
In a case like that. So my answer to that is, well, you start where the person is. So if I have an alcoholic in my office who says, "Oh, my wife makes me drink. She nags me so much, she makes me drink." The old me would have just dismissed that and said, "You're making excuses.
Yeah.
You made a choice to drink." But now I take that much more seriously.
Okay.
And I might start with that person as a victim
Uh-huh.
of nagging, and I would take that very
which is a
seriously.
totally different approach. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't stop there.
Of course.
I would start there. Then we would investigate how being a victim is a hazardous profession. There's a lot of mistakes you can make by being a victim. And one of them is by committing these offenses.
Yeah.
And so then we get to that point, and then uh, people are much more willing to set aside their victimization to talk about how how they have hurt somebody else. Now, if I have a person who wants to start there, that's fine too.
Mhm.
But I still, let's just say they're, a wife cheated on her husband and is really sorry about doing that and wants to save her marriage. So she wants to go and make it up for her husband. I'll help her do that. I'll help her figure out a way to make amends, much like you would with restorative justice. But I wouldn't stop there either. I would want to then take a look to see what was the victimization that preceded it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I don't do that, then it's probably just going to happen all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to look at both sides of the ledger here.
Absolutely fascinating. Where can people find your Road to Reconciliation book? What's the easiest way for them to get it?
It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they can learn more about you on your website, Keith Wilson Counseling, as well.
Yeah.
KeithWilsonCounseling.com. I didn't put it.
I
didn't say the .com.
A lot of things posted there. Yeah, KeithWilsonCounseling.com.
Well, keep writing. I'm excited to see what you come up with next. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and time with the audience. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.